Imagine a time when our ancestors took their first steps toward making the earth a home. Somewhere between wandering and belonging, communities gathered along rivers and springs, sowing the seeds of new life. From these humble beginnings rose the first cities, places where stone and clay, water and fire came together under human hands and the watchful gaze of gods. Listen closely to the distant whisper of reeds, the murmur of streams, the rustle of wheat in the wind. The story of the world's earliest cities is not a tale of conquest, but one of patience and collective devotion. It is a story woven from mud brick walls and sunken courts, from painted chambers and monumental stairs, from songs and prayers offered to forces both seen and unseen. In the pages that follow, we will trace a path through time, exploring where the first cities were built and who nurtured them into being. Let each section unfold slowly, like a scroll unrolling beneath lamplight, offering glimpses of landscapes transformed by human hands and hearts. 1. The whispering fertile crescent. Before walls and towers, before markets and palaces, there was earth, a fertile crescent of soil stretching from the Nile and Levant across to Mesopotamia. Here, wild barley and wheat bent under gentle breezes, and herds of gazelle grazed by seasonal streams. The last ice receded, and the climate warmed, inviting nomadic bands to settle near rivers that flowed reliably in spring. In these damp valleys, people learned that grain seeds scattered on damp ground would sprout. They discovered that goats and sheep could live alongside them rather than being chased. The adoption of agriculture and animal husbandry did not happen overnight. It came through experimentation, observation, and quiet tending. Villagers built simple huts from reeds and brush, then from mud and stone. Fires glowed within these shelters, casting dancing shadows on walls where children laughed and elders shared stories. Along the banks of the Jordan River and the slopes of the Zagros, small settlements dotted the landscape. People gathered near springs that never ran dry, using them as anchors in a shifting environment. They began to plant fig trees and to build granaries to store surplus grain. Seasons became cycles of sowing and harvest, of raising lambs and calves, of gathering by the hearth. Over centuries, the cycle of movement gave way to seasonal return, then to permanent habitation. The first cities were not born of sudden genius, but of gentle accumulation of knowledge passed down through generations, of walls built and rebuilt by patient hands, of communities who chose to stay. Within this crescent, artisans carved bone and stone into tools more specialized than before. Potters shaped clay vessels to carry water from springs, and weavers twisted fibers into baskets and clothing. With each new skill, the possibility of staying grew stronger. And as people settled, something else occurred. They looked up at the stars and gave thanks. Rituals emerged, honoring the earth and the sky, the cycles of birth and death. These rituals gathered people in shared spaces, and slowly those spaces became the hearts of settlements. A circle of huts became a plaza, a cluster of granaries became a precinct. Music played on reed pipes, voices rose in chants, and the earliest impressions of urban life, shared labor, communal worship, and the management of resources began to take form. As we move deeper into this story, we will visit specific places where these forces converged to create cities. 2. Jericho's stone walls. Travel now in your mind to a sun-washed plateau near the Jordan River Valley where the settlement of Jericho took root. Its earliest inhabitants, living around 10,000 years ago, belonged to the Natufian culture. They built circular huts of mud and brush on fertile ground and lived by hunting and gathering. As centuries passed, the community grew. These people experimented with growing barley and wheat, watering their fields from nearby springs. They collected wild seeds and selected those that flourished, developing strains that produced more grain. They domesticated goats, sheep, and pigs. From these gentle acts, Jericho evolved from a camp into a village, and from a village into something more. At some point, the people of Jericho decided to protect their settlement. Perhaps it was from flooding or from wild animals. Perhaps it was to mark a sacred boundary. They built a massive stone wall, nearly 2 meters thick and over 3 meters high, encircling their dwellings. Within the wall, they constructed a circular stone tower rising over 8 meters, built of carefully fitted blocks. Imagine the effort required. Piles of rocks collected from hills and riverbeds, each shaped and set without mortar, rising to form a vertical monument. The tower may have functioned as a watch post, a defense against floodwaters, or a ritual structure. Whatever its purpose, it demonstrates a level of coordination that speaks of community organization. Jericho's people were not just farmers and herders, they were planners and builders, capable of mobilizing labor to create something larger than any individual could achieve. Life inside Jericho's walls was busy. Houses were clustered in terraces cut into the slope. People stored grain in pits, grounded on basalt stones, and baked bread in hearths. Their diet included barley, wheat, lentils, and goat milk. They made baskets of reed and nets to catch fish in the river. They traded with neighboring groups for obsidian, turquoise, and seashells. Burials reveal another aspect of Jericho's culture. Skulls of the deceased were sometimes plastered and painted, with shells for eyes. These skulls were kept within houses, perhaps to honor ancestors or to protect the living. The living thus shared their space with the dead, bridging present and past. Over time, layers of occupation built up. When walls collapsed, they were rebuilt. When houses were abandoned, new ones rose atop them. Jericho became a mound and accumulation of centuries of life. At its peak, the settlement may have housed 2,000 to 3,000 people, each contributing to the maintenance of walls, irrigation channels, and communal structures. In later millennia, Jericho's importance continued. Its location near the Jordan River and on a trade route attracted new cultures. During the Bronze Age, Jericho was fortified again, this time with walls of mud brick. With each successive rebuilding, the city's footprint shifted and expanded, but its core remained tied to water, agriculture, and the work of hands moving stone. The story of Jericho reminds us that the first city builders were not kings, but community members. They did not carve their names in stone. Their legacy is in the walls and the shared spaces they created, built stone by stone and generation by generation. 3. Ain Gazal, Gazelles spring east of Jericho, across the Jordan River and near the modern city of Amman, lies the site of Ain Gazal. Its name means Gazelle's Spring, a reference to the abundant animal life that once roamed its forests, and to the reliable spring that anchored the settlement. Beginning around 7200 BCE, as people in the Levant shifted from nomadic lifestyles to settled farming, the site evolved into one of the largest communities in the region. The inhabitants built their houses of mud brick on terraced ground, arranged along the banks of the Zarqa River. Early houses were rectangular, with a square main room and a smaller side chamber. Walls were coated in mud on the outside and lime plaster inside, renewed annually to keep the rooms clean and bright. The roofs, supported by timbers, were likely accessed by ladders, much like those at Jericho and Çatalhöyük. Within these spaces, people stored grain, cooked in hearths, and gathered to share meals. Ain Gazal covered about 12 hectares and was divided into distinct districts. At its height, around 7000 BCE, it may have been home to 3,000 people, 4 to 5 times more than Jericho's population at that time. The community's success came from its access to diverse resources: fertile farmland for wheat, barley, and legumes, forests for wood and game, and trade connections that stretched into both mountainous west and desert east. Archaeological excavations have uncovered gazelle horn cores inside a house, evidence of hunting. At the same time, domesticated goats and sheep provided milk and meat. By this period, humans had become adept at managing animals as well as crops. Residents processed cereal grains with stone querns and stored food in pits or baskets. They also practiced burial customs that included plastering skulls, similar to Jericho, suggesting shared ritual traditions across the region. One of Ain Ghazal's most remarkable discoveries is a collection of human statues made of plaster and reed. These statues, nearly life-size, were created around 6500 BCE and depict men, women, and children with strikingly large eyes and stylized features. They were not placed in graves, but carefully deposited in pits, perhaps as offerings to ancestors or deities. Such artifacts hint at complex belief systems and an emerging artistic tradition. The people of Ain Ghazal also built structures that appear to be dedicated to rituals. Excavators found plastered skulls, masks, and representations of humans and animals within these buildings. These objects suggest that spiritual life was a communal affair integrated into the architecture of the settlement. But Ain Ghazal's prosperity was not eternal. Around 6500 BCE, the population dwindled dramatically, likely due to climatic shifts that caused prolonged droughts. As rainfall decreased and fields failed, people may have migrated elsewhere. By the end of the 6th millennium BCE, only a small community remained. The site's decline offers a quiet lesson. Early cities were fragile, dependent on environmental stability and careful management of resources. When circumstances changed, they could not always adapt. Yet the memory of Ain Ghazal endures in the statues and walls that survive. They speak of a community that experimented with new forms of living, bridging hunting and farming, ritual and daily life, and leaving behind a record of devotion and creativity. 4. Çatalhöyük's Painted Chambers journey northwest to the central Anatolian plateau, where the settlement of Çatalhöyük flourished between 7100 and 5950 BCE. This forked mound, as its name suggests, sits near the meander of the Çarşamba River amid wetlands and steppe. At its zenith, Çatalhöyük supported between 3,500 and 8,000 residents. Unlike Jericho or Ain Ghazal, the settlement lacked streets. Houses were built so tightly together that they shared walls, forming a honeycomb of mud brick dwellings. People moved along the flat roofs and descended into their homes by ladder through a hole in the ceiling. Each house contained a central room with an oven, raised platforms for sleeping and working, and storage rooms. The interior walls were often plastered and painted with murals of geometric patterns, hunting scenes, and ritual motifs. Hands dipped in ochre left prints upon the walls, marking presence and blessing. Daily life at Çatalhöyük revolved around communal cooperation. Families cultivated wheat, barley, and rye, and kept herds of sheep and goats. In later centuries, they added cattle to their livestock, perhaps influenced by neighboring groups. They collected reeds from nearby wetlands to weave mats and create partitions. The lack of streets meant that rooftop pathways functioned as thoroughfares. Neighbors greeted each other as they walked across the roofs, and children played under the open sky. The roofs also provided space for drying grain, fruits, and meat. The community's design minimized exterior walls exposed to invaders or harsh weather, preserving heat in winter and coolness in dry summer. Inside the houses, life and death coexisted intimately. The dead were buried beneath the floors or in platforms. Adults were interred in a flexed position, and infants placed in urns. Occasionally, skulls were removed, plastered, and displayed in the house, reflecting ancestor veneration. Scenes painted on the walls depict vultures and headless figures. Archaeologists interpret these images as representing excarnation or ritual practices. But not all paintings were macabre. Some depict obsidian-handled leopards, swirling patterns, and human hands reaching toward the sky. Perhaps these images evoke mythic stories told around the hearth, passed down as children drifted to sleep. The art of Çatalhöyük extended beyond walls. People crafted figurines from clay, stone, and bone. The most famous is a seated female figure known as the Mother Goddess, symbolizing fertility and abundance. Whether she represents a deity or a revered ancestor, her presence in a domestic context underlines how spiritual life permeated everyday spaces. In addition to art, the settlement produced obsidian tools and traded them with neighboring communities. Obsidian blades from Çatalhöyük have been found hundreds of kilometers away, evidence of far-reaching trade networks. Over centuries, the settlement grew and shrank. Houses were demolished and rebuilt atop old foundations, creating a layered mound. Eventually, around 5950 BCE, the site was abandoned, perhaps due to environmental change or social shift. Yet, the memory of Çatalhöyük endures in its art, architecture, and the sense of community that arises from climbing ladders through roofs into rooms where ancestors lie beneath. 5. Mergar, a village by the pass. Turning eastwards to the Kachi plain of Baluchistan at the foot of the Bolan Pass, the Neolithic site of Mergar reveals the early roots of what would later become the Indus-Sarasvati civilization. Begun around 7000 BCE, Mergar was a small farming village composed of mud brick houses arranged in clusters. These houses shared walls and were oriented roughly north-south or east-west. Like their counterparts in the Fertile Crescent, the inhabitants entered their homes from the roof. Doorways were rare. Within the houses, floors were sometimes painted or plastered, and hearths provided warmth and space for cooking. The settlement covered about 200 hectares and shows evidence of continuous occupation over 3 millennia. Mergar's location at the Bolan Pass made it a crossroads between the Iranian Plateau, Central Asia, and the Indus Plain. Its people cultivated barley and wheat, storing grain in large jars and grinding it with stones. They domesticated cattle, including the zebu, as well as sheep and goats. Evidence suggests that by the 6th millennium BCE, they were among the first to spin and weave cotton. In burial contexts, archaeologists discovered cotton threads preserved by copper beads. If these threads were spun from domesticated cotton, then Mergar's farmers may have pioneered the cultivation of this plant, a key contribution to world agriculture. The people of Mergar engaged in trade, acquiring lapis lazuli, seashells, and turquoise from distant regions. Their craftsmen produced ornaments from stone, shell, and terracotta. Some graves contain necklaces, bangles, and beads. The variety of materials reveals long-distance contacts and a taste for decoration. More utilitarian technologies included flint drills, stone and copper crucibles, updraft kilns for firing pottery, and large pit kilns. The pottery of Mergar evolved over time. Early wares were simple, with plant and geometric designs, while later pieces showed more sophistication with stylized animals and pipal leaves. The pipal leaf motif hints at early religious symbolism that would later appear in the Indus Valley. Burial practices provide a window into social life. Early graves included tools and ornaments. Later burials became simpler, leaving primarily personal adornments. Some skeletons show evidence of dental work, holes drilled into molars using flint points, possibly to relieve pain. This proto-dentistry suggests a concern for health and a knowledge of human anatomy. Children were buried near houses, in cemeteries oriented according to cardinal directions. These rituals indicate an organized community with beliefs about life after death. Mergar thrived for several millennia, slowly changing as its inhabitants experimented with new crops, crafts, and social practices. Around 4000 BCE, the region saw an increase in small agricultural settlements, and by 3000 BCE, the urban centers of the Indus Valley began to emerge. As populations shifted toward the floodplains, Mergar declined, yet its legacy endures. The innovations pioneered there, from cotton cultivation to ceramic production, would echo through the later cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. In the quiet golden light of dawn, one can imagine the farmers of Mergar tending wheat and barley, weaving cotton threads, and sharing stories that would travel far beyond their village by the pass. 6. The Indus Basin's hidden grids. Several centuries after Mehrgar, along the floodplains of the Indus River and its tributaries, a remarkable urban civilization emerged. Between 2600 and 1900 BCE, cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, and Lothal rose on lands shaped by seasonal floods. The people of the Indus Valley developed an urban planning system unparalleled in the ancient world. Their cities were laid out on a precise grid, with main streets running north-south and east-west. Houses were built along these streets using standardized baked bricks, giving the cities a uniform appearance. A visitor walking through Mohenjo-Daro would encounter straight avenues flanked by two-story buildings, each with a private well or courtyard. The grid extended into smaller lanes, dividing the city into blocks. This level of planning suggests a central authority, coordinating construction, yet no palaces or monumental temples dominate the skyline. Instead, the Indus cities reveal a different conception of urban life, one rooted in civic amenities and communal infrastructure. One of the most astonishing features of these cities is their water management. Nearly every house drew water from a well or cistern. Wastewater drained through covered brick channels into street drains, which emptied outside the city or into soak pits. Even small houses were connected to the drainage system, indicating that cleanliness and public health were priorities. This advanced sanitation system is unmatched in other early civilizations. In Mohenjo-Daro, a large public bath known as the Great Bath occupies a central platform. Constructed of finely fitted bricks coated in bitumen to make it watertight, the bath may have been used for ritual purification or communal gatherings. Nearby, granaries stored grain collected from farmers and redistributed during shortages. Elevated platforms protected the grain from floods, and ventilation slots ensured airflow. These features point to an organized administration that managed resources for the collective good. Trade and craft specialization flourished. The Indus people produced high-quality ceramics, beadwork, metal tools, and textiles. They used standardized weights and measures made of chert or other stones, allowing merchants to trade fairly. They traded with cultures across the Iranian Plateau, Mesopotamia, and Central Asia, exchanging goods like cotton textiles, carnelian beads, lapis lazuli, and precious metals. Seals carved with intricate animal motifs and abstract script suggest a system of identification and accounting. Though their script remains undeciphered, the seals reveal a complex bureaucracy. The absence of monumental temples or palaces suggests that religious and political power may have been more diffuse than in other civilizations. Instead of kings and priests dominating the skyline, authority manifested in the orderly layout of streets and the uniformity of brickwork. Daily life in the Indus cities was varied. People lived in houses with flat roofs, some with internal courtyards. They cooked in small hearths and stored food in jars. Excavations reveal toys, games, and musical instruments. Board games with carved depressions were found, hinting at leisure activities similar to those at Ain-Ghazal. The diet included wheat, barley, millet, rice, fruits, and meat from cattle, buffalo, sheep, and goats. Evidence of dental lesions shows that some people chewed sugary sweets. Burials were simple, often without elaborate grave goods. The emphasis appears to have been on living well rather than displaying wealth in death. By around 1900 BCE, the Indus cities began to decline. Shifts in river courses, environmental stress, and perhaps socio-political changes led to depopulation. People migrated east toward the Ganges or north toward smaller settlements. The script fell out of use, and the urban grid faded back into the earth. Yet the memory of these cities lives on in the careful alignment of bricks, the drains that once carried water, and the seals that still bear silent symbols. They remind us that the first cities could be clean, orderly, and egalitarian places where thousands of people cooperated to create a harmonious environment. As we walk along their ghostly streets in our imagination, the echo of footsteps on baked brick guides us toward the next chapter of our journey. 7. The Sumerian Plains, Eridu, and the Sacred City. Beyond the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, on a fertile plain where the earth is saturated with silt, the Sumerian city of Eridu rose. According to ancient Sumerian tradition, Eridu was the first city, the place where kingship descended from heaven. Archaeologists date its founding to around 5400 BCE. It grew on a sand dune near a branch of the Euphrates, at the edge of marshes that teemed with fish and waterfowl. The people of Eridu built reed houses at first, then mud brick dwellings. They fished, hunted, and cultivated date palms, barley, and emmer using irrigation canals to bring water from the river. Over time, the settlement expanded, with houses clustered around a temple dedicated to Enki, the god of freshwater and wisdom. The temple at Eridu did not remain static. It was rebuilt and enlarged many times over centuries. Each new temple was constructed on top of the previous one, creating a layered mound that rose above the plain. From the smallest platform, measuring a few meters across, the temple grew into a multi-tiered ziggurat. Priest-kings and priests may have overseen the construction, using offerings from the community to finance the work. The temple served as the city's religious heart, but it was also an economic center. Surplus grain and goods were stored in its granaries. Fishermen and farmers brought offerings, and in return they received rations. The temple administrators organized irrigation, redistributed water, and mediated disputes. In this way, the Temple of Eridu functioned as an early form of government, weaving spiritual authority with practical administration myths surround Eridu. Sumerian literature describes it as a place of beginnings, a paradise where gods and humans walk together. Enki, the city's patron, is said to have created humans from clay to relieve the gods of labor. He resided in a palace called the Abzu, meaning house of the deep waters. Within its walls, canals flowed like streams, and fish swam in basins. Outside, the marshes stretched toward the horizon, glistening under the sun. It is easy to imagine priests and pilgrims approaching the temple by boat, carrying offerings and singing hymns. Over time, new cities would eclipse Eridu in size and power, but in Sumerian memory, it remained sacred. Even when Eridu was eventually abandoned around 600 BCE, pilgrims still visited its ruins to honor Enki. Who built Eridu? Not a single architect or king, but generations of farmers, fishers, potters, and priests. They dug canals, shaped bricks from river mud, and set them into walls. They carved reliefs and performed rituals. Their labor and devotion transformed a sand dune into a city that anchored Sumerian mythology. As we listen to the distant murmur of the Euphrates, we can imagine them moving through reed beds in small boats, bringing baskets of fish and barley to the temple, their voices rising in praise of the deity who blessed their waters. 8. Uruk, the White Temple and the Ziggurat north of Eridu on the banks of the Euphrates. The city of Uruk rose to become one of the largest urban centers of the 4th millennium BCE. By around 3200 BCE, Uruk's population may have reached 40,000 inhabitants, with another 80 to 90,000 living in its surrounding countryside. This scale was unprecedented. Fields of barley and herds of livestock fed the city, while artisans produced textiles, pottery, and metal goods. A theocratic society emerged, led by priestly elites who controlled the temple economy. Central to Uruk's urban landscape was a colossal platform of sun-dried bricks topped by the White Temple. The White Temple sat atop a ziggurat nearly 12 meters high. Its exterior was whitewashed with gypsum plaster, giving it a shimmering appearance against the sky. The temple itself was a rectangular hall oriented toward the heavens with a bent axis plan. One entered from a side staircase, then turned 90 degrees to face the altar. The walls were decorated with mosaics of colored clay cones embedded in plaster. Outside, the ziggurat's terraces were coated with bitumen to protect against rain and provided a solid foundation. Building such a structure required immense labor estimates suggest that 1,500 workers, toiling 10 hours a day for 5 years, would have been needed to lay the bricks for the outer revetment alone. The sheer scale of the project demonstrates the organized coordination of resources and manpower. Uruk's layout included residential quarters, administrative buildings, workshops, and temples. Canals ran through the city, bringing water and enabling transport. Within the crafts district, potters turned wheels, weavers spun wool, and metalworkers cast bronze tools. Scribes incised pictographic symbols on clay tablets, recording transactions and storing myths. From these pictographs evolved the earliest forms of cuneiform writing. Among the tablets are myths that tell of kings, gods, and adventures, stories that would later coalesce into the Epic of Gilgamesh. Uruk is also associated with the legendary King Gilgamesh, who was said to have built the city's walls and journeyed to the ends of the earth in search of immortality. While the epic blends myth and history, its description of Uruk's massive wall resonates with archaeological evidence of thick fortifications. Walking through Uruk at dawn, one might see priests ascending the ziggurat to offer sacrifices, merchants unloading goods from boats, and scribes tallying contributions of grain. The smell of baking bread and brewing beer would mingle with incense. Citizens would gather in courtyards to discuss news, and children would learn to recite hymns to Inanna, the city's patron goddess. As the sun set, the white temple's plastered walls would glow with golden light, and the city's silhouette would reflect in canal waters. For centuries, Uruk was the beating heart of Sumerian civilization. When it eventually declined, overtaken by shifting trade routes and new powers, it left behind a legacy of writing, monumental architecture, and mythology that continues to shape our understanding of early urban life. 9. Memphis, White Walls by the Nile. To the southwest, on the fertile floodplain where the Nile fans into its delta, another city emerged that would shape the course of history. According to Egyptian tradition, Memphis was founded around 2900 BCE by Menes, sometimes identified with Narmer, the ruler who united Upper and Lower Egypt. The city's ancient name, likely translated as White Walls, refers to its whitewashed palace, which gleamed in the sun. Memphis served as the capital during Egypt's early dynastic and Old Kingdom periods. Positioned between Upper and Lower Egypt, it controlled trade and taxation along the Nile, making it a strategic hub. Memphis was not only a political center, but also a religious one. It was the home of Ptah, the god of craftsmen and creation, and housed his great temple. Priests tended to rituals that maintained cosmic order, and artisans working in the temple workshops produced statues, amulets, and fine jewelry. Nearby at Saqqara, the necropolis of Memphis, architects built the earliest large-scale stone monuments. The step pyramid of Djoser, designed by the architect Imhotep around the 27th century BCE, stands as a testament to this ingenuity. The pyramid's 6 stacked mastabas, bench-like structures, rise above the desert, encircled by a wall of limestone. This complex introduced the world to monumental stone architecture and paved the way for later pyramids at Giza. Life in Memphis blended administration, religion, and trade. Officials recorded taxes, census data, and agricultural yields. Scribes, trained from childhood, worked in offices to maintain the flow of information. Craftsmen produced goods for both domestic use and export. The city's port buzzed with activity as boats arrived from Nubia to the south and the Mediterranean to the north. Surrounding fields, fertilized by the Nile's annual flood, produced grain to feed the population. The climate was gentler than that of Mesopotamia. There were no unpredictable floods, and the river flowed steadily. This stability allowed for long periods of architectural planning and the accumulation of wealth. The White Walls of Memphis witnessed processions of pharaohs, scribes, priests, and farmers all participating in the maintenance of Mayat, the Egyptian concept of harmony and balance. Though Thebes and later Alexandria would eclipse Memphis politically, the city remained culturally significant for centuries. During the New Kingdom, its temples were renovated and expanded. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of its grandeur, describing colossal statues and sacred animals. Eventually, Memphis faded, its monuments pillaged for stone. Yet, in the gentle curve of the Nile, one can still imagine the white walls gleaming. The story of Memphis teaches us that cities can grow from myth and political vision, anchored by rivers that provide sustenance and a sense of order. 10. Caral Soupe. Pyramids in the desert. On the opposite side of the world, along the dry coastal plain of Peru, lies a site that surprises many: the sacred city of Caral Soupe, the oldest known center of civilization in the Americas. Approximately 5,000 years old, Caral Soupe is perched on a desert terrace overlooking the green valley of the Soupe River. It covers 626 hectares and is one of 18 urban settlements in the region. Yet Caral stands out because of its size and preservation. Its builders erected monumental stone and earthen platform mounds, sunken circular courts, and pyramidal structures, a surprising feat in a land without the wheel, draft animals, or metal tools. The city's plan reveals ceremonial functions and a powerful religious ideology. The climate of the Soupe Valley is arid with virtually no rain. The people of Caral relied on the river's seasonal flows and on irrigation canals to water their crops. They cultivated cotton, beans, squash, and peppers, and fished in the rich coastal waters. Cotton was particularly important, woven into nets. It allowed fishermen to harvest anchovies in large quantities, providing protein to support urban life. The 6 pyramids at Caral rise from the desert floor like gentle mountains. They are built of stone rubble, held in place by woven baskets and walls. On their summits, researchers have found rooms with fire pits, musical instruments, and decorative objects. These spaces likely hosted rituals involving music, dance, and offerings. Among the artifacts recovered is a quipu, a bundle of knotted cords used in Andean civilizations to record information. This early use of the quipu suggests that Caral's administrators recorded agricultural yields or ceremonial calendars long before the Inca. Caral's layout separates residential areas from ceremonial precincts. Common people lived in modest houses near cultivated fields, while elites occupied residences adjacent to the pyramids. Sunken circular plazas provided gathering places for community rituals, their design focusing attention inward toward the performers. The absence of defensive walls implies that Caral enjoyed a period of peace or that its leaders commanded respect over a large region. Trade routes connected Caral to inland valleys and coastal fishing communities. Through these networks, people exchanged cotton, fish, gourds, and medicinal plants. The city's planners prioritized communal spaces and ceremonial structures over individual homes, suggesting a society organized around collective identity rather than individual power. Radiocarbon dating places Caral's development between 3000 and 1800 BCE. This time frame makes it contemporaneous with early Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet Caral developed independently, without influence from the Old World. Eventually, environmental changes or social shifts led to its abandonment. But the mounds remained, covered by sand and protected by the dry climate. When archaeologists began excavations in the 20th century, they uncovered a city that challenges assumptions about where complex societies first arose. Caral teaches us that humans across the globe, when faced with similar challenges, aridity, the need for coordination, the desire for spirituality, can arrive at similar solutions: monumental architecture, record-keeping, and social organization. In the stillness of the desert, with the hum of the wind through cotton fields, one can imagine the sound of reed flutes and the murmur of voices rising from sunken courts. 11. Erlitou, palaces of bronze. In the heart of China's Central Plains, near the Yellow River, an ancient city emerged during the early Bronze Age. Known as Erlitou, it flourished between roughly 1900 and 1500 BCE and may correspond to the semi-legendary Xia dynasty. The Erlitou culture is considered the first state-level society in China. Excavations have revealed palatial buildings, royal tombs, paved roads, and advanced bronze foundries. The city covered nearly 300 hectares at its peak and was laid out with a grid of roads and specialized districts. The palaces at Erlitou were constructed on rammed earth foundations enclosed by courtyards. 8 palatial complexes have been identified, with 3 fully excavated. These complexes contained halls, ancillary rooms, and storage spaces. Elite burials were placed within the courtyards, accompanied by bronze vessels, jade ornaments, turquoise, and lacquerware. The presence of luxurious grave goods indicates a hierarchical society in which elites held significant power. Other tombs belonging to commoners or lower elites were scattered across the site. The road network linked palaces to craft workshops and residential areas. In one sector, archaeologists uncovered parallel wagon tracks, the earliest known evidence of wheeled transport in China. The tracks, about a meter wide, suggest that carts drawn by oxen or horses moved along these roads, carrying goods and people. Erlitou's bronze foundries produced vessels that are among the earliest known in China. These vessels were used for ritual consumption of wine, indicating that bronze technology was initially tied to ceremonial practices. Artisans also worked turquoise into intricate pieces and produced ceramics with characteristic gray or black surfaces. The layout of Erlitou reflects an organized administration. Palaces and workshops were separated by walls and roads, and a large ceremonial area sat at the city's core. Archaeologists have not found city walls, suggesting that defense was not a primary concern or that natural barriers sufficed. Instead, the emphasis was on orderly arrangement and ritual display. Debates about Erlitou revolve around its identity. Some scholars argue that it represents the capital of the legendary Xia dynasty, described in later texts as the first Chinese dynasty. Others caution against directly equating archaeological cultures with dynasties recorded centuries later. Regardless, Erlitou clearly marks a transition from Neolithic villages to an organized urban state. Its builders were farmers and metallurgists, administrators and craftsmen who harnessed the fertile soils of the Yellow River Valley and developed technologies that would shape Chinese civilization. In the soft light of the Central Plains, one can imagine carts rattling along earthen roads, bronze casters tending fires, and ritual specialists pouring wine into gleaming vessels. Erlitou's story reminds us that cities emerged independently in different parts of the world, each adapting to local resources and cultural needs. 12. Knossos, Palace of the Labyrinth. Across the sea in the Mediterranean, on the island of Crete, a unique city blossomed in the Bronze Age. Knossos began as a modest Neolithic settlement around 7000 BCE. Early inhabitants constructed simple mud brick houses on fertile plains and cultivated barley, wheat, and lentils. Over the centuries, these communities expanded, and by 6000 BCE, they built more complex homes with stone foundations. They traded obsidian and other materials across the Aegean, connecting with distant islands. As time passed, Knossos evolved from village to town and then to city, reflecting a gradual but profound transformation. Around 2000 BCE, during the early Minoan period, the first grand palace of Knossos rose. This palace was an intricate complex with courtyards, storerooms, workshops, and residences for the ruling elite. Built of rubble masonry and timber, its walls were coated with plaster and painted with vibrant frescoes. The central courtyard measured roughly 50 by 30 meters, while surrounding rooms created a labyrinthine layout. Stone staircases connected multiple levels, and architectural innovations like light wells brought sunlight into interior spaces. Columns of cypress wood tapered downward, giving the palace a distinctive appearance. The palace complex included religious shrines where priests and priestesses performed ceremonies honoring a mother goddess and other deities. The presence of storerooms capable of holding vast reserves of oil and grain suggests that the palace controlled agricultural surplus and redistributed it during festivals or lean seasons. Knossos developed advanced infrastructure. Terracotta pipes carried water and removed waste. Workshops produced fine pottery, intricately carved seals, and metal tools. The palace frescoes depict scenes of nature, ritual, and sport, including the famous bull-leaping ceremony. In this ritual, young men and women grasped the horns of a charging bull and vaulted over its back, an act of agility and reverence. The bull motif appears throughout Minoan art, reflecting the centrality of this animal in Minoan myth and religion. Stories that emerged in later Greek mythology, such as the legend of Theseus and the Minotaur, may echo memories of Knossos' labyrinthine palace and bull cult. Trade networks radiated from Knossos. Minoan ships sailed to Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. They exported olive oil, wine, saffron, and finely crafted pottery. In return, they imported copper, tin, gold, and ivory. The wealth generated from trade supported a flourishing artistic tradition. Artisans crafted jewelry, frescoes, and figurines. Scribes recorded inventories in Linear A, a script that remains undeciphered. The city thrived for centuries, but around 1450 BCE, a series of earthquakes, or possibly the eruption of Thera, Santorini, weakened the palace. Shortly thereafter, Mycenaean Greeks may have taken control. Knossos continued in reduced form, and by 1100 BCE, it had declined into obscurity. Knossos embodies the marriage of architecture and myth. Its palace, with maze-like corridors and hidden chambers, inspired legends of a labyrinth. Its bull frescoes and rituals may have given rise to stories of a half-man, half-bull creature. Yet behind the myths lie real builders, farmers who cultivated Crete's plains, sailors who navigated turquoise waters, and artisans who painted walls with dolphins and lilies. The city's memory endures in the red columns and frescoes that still stand, inviting us to wander its halls in imagination and to feel the cool breeze from the Aegean as it whispers through the ruins. 13. Shared threads: water, grain, and stone. As we reflect on these early cities, Jericho, Ain Ghazal, Çatalhöyük, Mergar, the Indus centers, Eridu, Uruk, Memphis, Caral, Erlitou, and Knossos, a set of shared threads emerges. Each city grew near a dependable water source. Springs, rivers, marshes, and valleys anchored communities in place. Water allowed the cultivation of grain, barley, wheat, millet, and rice, and supported livestock. Irrigation canals, wells, and reservoirs appear again and again. Human hands shaped water to serve fields, and in return, water sustained cities. Where water was scarce, as in Caral or the Supa Valley, ingenuity emerged. Canals diverted river flow, cotton nets supported fishing, and rainless terraces sheltered crops. Grain lies at the heart of urban life. In the Jordan Valley and Anatolia, early farmers domesticated wheat and barley. In the Indus region, they added millet and rice. In China, millet and later rice supported dense populations. Surplus grain freed some people from constant food production, enabling specialization. Artisans, priests, rulers, and traders could emerge because farmers produced more than their families needed. Grain also became a medium of taxation and redistribution. Temples at Eridu and Uruk stored grain. Granaries in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro protected it from floods. The Palace of Knossos managed oil and grain storage. The pyramids of Caral served ceremonial as well as economic functions. Stone, mud, and brick were the building blocks of early cities. The walls of Jericho were made of stone. The houses of Çatalhöyük were mud brick. Mergar's structures combined mud and timber. The Indus cities used standardized fired bricks. Uruk and Eridu built ziggurats of sun-dried bricks. Memphis raised limestone pyramids. Caral constructed earthen mounds. Erlitou rammed earth into solid foundations. Knossos built palaces of rubble masonry and timber. In each case, builders adapted local materials to create durable architecture. The process of making bricks, stacking stones, and plastering walls required collective labor. It fostered cooperation and created shared spaces, plazas, temples, courtyards where social and religious life unfolded. Another shared thread is the role of ritual and cosmology. Cities were not merely economic centers, they were sacred landscapes. Temples, shrines, and plazas oriented communities toward the divine. The Tower of Jericho, the plastered skulls of Ain Ghazal, the murals of Çatalhöyük, the ziggurats of Sumer, the pyramids of Egypt and Caral, the palaces of Minoan Crete, and the ritual bronzes of Erlitou all testify to a profound engagement with the unseen. People sought to harmonize earthly life with cosmic forces to ensure fertility and order. They built monuments that would last beyond their lifetimes, connecting ancestors and descendants. These monuments, rising above fields and houses, anchored the community and offered a sense of stability. Finally, trade and communication weaved these cities together. Obsidian from Çatalhöyük traveled across Anatolia. Lapis lazuli and shells reached Mergar. Seals and goods from the Indus civilization found their way to Mesopotamia. Minoan merchants sailed to Egypt and the Yam al-Levant. Caral exchanged cotton and fish along the Andean coast. Erlitou engaged in networks across the Yellow River Valley. Exchange not only brought goods, but also ideas, techniques for pottery and metalworking, styles of architecture and art, and perhaps stories and beliefs. Even when civilizations arose independently, human curiosity and movement ensured that innovations traveled. The first cities were nodes in emerging networks that would eventually span continents. Recognizing these shared threads does not diminish the uniqueness of each city. Rather, it reveals a tapestry of human creativity responding to similar challenges. Across different landscapes and times, our ancestors discovered how to harness water, cultivate grain, shape stone, and live together. They built cities that, while diverse in form and belief, share an underlying harmony. This harmony is felt in the rhythm of daily life: the planting and harvest, the chant of priests, the hum of markets, the laughter of children on rooftops. As we continue our journey, we turn to the builders themselves, the people who shaped these worlds. 14. Belief systems, temples, rituals, and the sacred. In the hush of early evening, when the last light strikes the rooftops and long shadows stretch across courtyards, imagination drifts to the rituals that animated the first cities. Religion and spirituality permeated urban life. The earliest temples at Eridu were rebuilt again and again, each new layer covering the sacred earth beneath. Pilgrims brought offerings, and priests recited hymns to Enki, the lord of freshwater. The ziggurat of Uruk rose high above the city, its whitewashed walls gleaming. From its terrace, priests could survey the fields and offer prayers for fertile harvests. The voices of singers, accompanied by lyres and drums, echoed along the streets. In Memphis, the Temple of Ptah was the center of creation myth. Priests performed ceremonies to maintain the cosmic balance of Ma'at, ensuring that the sun would rise and the Nile would flood at the proper time. In Çatalhöyük, religion intertwined with domestic life. Shrines were integrated into houses, their walls painted with scenes of leopards, bulls, and human figures engaged in ritual. Clay figurines of seated women, sometimes interpreted as goddesses, were placed in niches. Rituals may have involved feasting, dancing, and trance. At Ain Ghazal, life-size statues were crafted from plaster and reed, then buried in pits. The act of creating and interring these statues hints at beliefs concerning ancestors or spirits who watched over the community. In the Indus cities, the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro suggests ceremonial bathing or purification, and small terracotta figurines of mother goddesses and animals indicate household rituals. The absence of large temples does not imply a lack of religion. Rather, it suggests that spirituality may have been decentralized, woven into daily tasks. Caral's sunken circular courts served as theaters for communal ceremonies. Musicians played flutes made of condor and pelican bones, people danced and sang, and priests communicated with the supernatural. The presence of quipu at Caral hints at record-keeping for offerings or ritual calendars. In Uruk, bronze vessels were used to pour wine in ceremonies that honored ancestors and deities. The shapes and decorations of these bronzes reflect cosmological beliefs about the heavens, earth, and underworld. At Knossos, frescoes show priests and priestesses performing rituals before altars. The bull-leaping ceremony may have been both athletic and religious, symbolizing the mastery of nature and the cycle of life. The labyrinthine design of the palace suggests hidden chambers where initiations or secret rites took place. Belief systems provided meaning and cohesion. They explained the mysteries of birth, death, and the changing seasons. They justified the authority of rulers and priests. Rituals synchronized the movements of individuals with the rhythms of the cosmos. In performing rituals, people expressed their hopes for rain and harvest, their fears of drought and disease, and their gratitude for life's gifts. Even as cities grew and specialized, spirituality remained a unifying force. It transcended social divisions, bringing together farmers, artisans, and elites in shared acts of devotion. The first cities thus became theaters for sacred drama, spaces where humans negotiated with unseen forces to secure the blessings of the natural world. 15. The voices of builders. Who, then, built the first cities? The answer lies not in the names of kings or architects, but in the collective endeavors of countless individuals. Imagine the calloused hands of farmers sowing barley along the Jordan and Euphrates, of women grinding grain on stone querns, of children carrying water from springs. Envision young men and women mixing mud and straw to make bricks, stacking them into walls under the guidance of elders. Hear the voices of potters shaping clay on wheels, of weavers spinning wool and cotton, of fishermen mending nets and hauling their catch ashore. Picture priests and priestesses chanting prayers, scribes scratching symbols onto clay tablets, and midwives attending births in dimly lit rooms. Consider the labor needed to build Jericho's stone tower, men and women carrying stones from riverbeds, forming human chains to pass rocks along, setting each one in place with care and memory of those who built before. Think of the artisans at Çatalhöyük painting walls with ochre, their fingers stained red as they outline birds and bulls. Hear the conversation of neighbors on rooftops, sharing gossip and advice. Feel the sweat of Caral's workers as they hauled stones up ramps to construct pyramids, and the satisfaction they felt when a new platform was complete. Sense the pride of artisans at Uruk as they cast bronze vessels, knowing they were part of something larger, a ritual that connected living and dead. These builders were not nameless masses. They were individuals with families, hopes, and fears. They lived, loved, and died within their communities. They passed on knowledge of how to irrigate fields, weave baskets, and track the stars. Their voices may not be recorded in texts, but they echo in the structures they left behind. Each brick in the White Temple of Uruk bears the imprint of a human hand. Each carved seal from Mohenjo-Daro holds the creativity of an artisan. The first cities were built not by the will of a single ruler, but by the collaborative energy of many. Yet leadership also played a role. Elders, priests, and chiefs coordinated labor, planned structures, and mediated disputes. Their authority likely arose from their ability to interpret omens, manage resources, or organize communal gatherings. In the Indus Valley, standardized bricks and weights imply central planning. At Caral, the distribution of goods and the organization of ceremonies suggest hierarchical oversight. In Erlitou and Knossos, palaces and grave goods point to an elite class that directed construction. But even these elites depended on the labor of the many. Without farmers, craftsmen, and builders, the palaces would remain dreams. When we ask who built the first cities, we should also consider the forces that enabled city life, the rivers that flooded and receded, the grains that domesticated humans as much as humans domesticated them, the animals that provided milk and wool, and the unseen powers to which people prayed. The builders included not only humans, but also the environment and spiritual beliefs that shaped their choices. Recognizing this, we can appreciate the first cities as collaborative achievements in which humans worked with nature and the divine to create spaces of belonging. In this recognition lies a gentle humility, one that invites us to honor the ordinary as much as the extraordinary. 16. Myths and memory. As centuries passed, memories of the first cities transformed into stories. In Sumer, the tale of Gilgamesh portrays Uruk as a city so splendid that its walls shine like copper. Gilgamesh himself is described as the builder of those walls and the seeker of immortality. His journey to find eternal life reflects a human yearning that resonates across cultures. The story of the flood, recounted in Mesopotamian epics and later in biblical texts, may echo memories of the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates, or of ancient floods that destroyed settlements. These myths preserved collective memory and encoded wisdom about the fragility of life and the limits of power. In Egypt, myths of Osiris and Isis, of Ra's journey across the sky, and of Ma'at's balance provided frameworks for understanding the cosmos. The pharaoh, as divine intermediary, played a role in rituals that sustained the world. Myths connected Memphis and other cities to a timeless order. In Greece, later stories of Theseus navigating the labyrinth at Knossos to slay the Io Minotaur recall a Bronze Age reality. The labyrinth could be a metaphor for the palace's complexity. The Minotaur, a symbol of untamed nature or of ritual bull worship. In the Andes, though we have no written myths from Caral, later Andean traditions speak of creator gods who formed people from lakes and mountains and taught them to cultivate crops and build terraces. Perhaps echoes of Caral's builders survive in these stories. Myths do not provide literal histories. Instead, they offer insights into how people understood their world. They reveal values, courage, wisdom, humility, and warn against hubris. They recall great floods, droughts, and migrations, hinting at environmental events that shaped human destinies. They link cities to cosmic events, making the local universal. When we listen to these stories with quiet minds, we feel the resonance between past and present. Our own lives, though shaped by technology, still grapple with questions of mortality, meaning, and belonging. Myths remind us that the first cities were not only places of brick and stone, but also realms of imagination. Memory also lives in the earth. Archaeological sites are layers of human experience. Each layer is a page in a book that took millennia to write. Archaeologists, like patient readers, peel back these layers, revealing hearths and walls, tools and ornaments. They decipher pollen grains to understand crops, examine bones to reconstruct diets, and analyze residues to detect ancient perfumes. Through these traces, they reconstruct not just events, but feelings, the warmth of a hearth, the rhythm of a workday, the solemnity of a ritual. When we walk across a mound or view an artifact in a museum, we are engaging in a dialogue with people who lived thousands of years ago. In this dialogue, we recognize that we share desires for safety, beauty, connection, and transcendence. The first cities are therefore living memories. They persist not only in stones and myths, but also in our bodies. The grains we eat today descend from those early crops. The houses we live in, the rituals we practice, and the stories we tell all bear faint echoes of Jericho, Uruk, and Knossos. As we honor these cities, we honor our own roots. We are the inheritors of their dreams and the continuers of their work. In their ruins, we find inspiration to build with care, to live in harmony with the natural world, and to remember the unseen forces that sustain us. 17. Echoes through time. The night deepens and our journey approaches its gentle end. We have wandered along riverbanks and through deserts, across plains and over seas. We have climbed ziggurats and pyramids, walked along grid-lined streets and across rooftop pathways. We have listened to the whisper of reeds in marshes and the hum of cicadas in cotton fields. In these sounds, we heard the echoes of the first cities and of the people who built them. What emerges from this journey is a sense of continuity, though thousands of years separate us. From Jericho, Ain Ghazal, Çatalhöyük, Mergar, the Indus cities, Eridu, Uruk, Memphis, Caral, Erlitou, and Knossos, their stories resonate with our own. They remind us that home is more than a shelter. It is a community, a shared set of practices, a relationship with the land and the cosmos. They show us that cities can be built from mud and love, from stone and song, from patience and prayer. They teach us that creativity flourishes when people work together, that resourcefulness emerges in response to challenge, and that beauty resides in the everyday acts of tending fields, mixing mortar, and painting walls. As you settle into sleep, allow these echoes to guide you. Imagine walking through a sunken plaza at Caral, feeling the cool sand beneath your feet, or climbing a ladder into a Çatalhöyük house, the smell of bread and clay mingling in the air, or watching the sunrise over Uruk's white temple, the brick turning golden in the dawn light. Hear the murmur of the Nile at Memphis, the susurration of barley fields along the Jordan, the rustle of poplar leaves in the central plains of China. These cities may be ruins now, but their spirit lingers in the quiet moments between waking and dreaming. In honoring the first cities, we honor the countless generations who made our world. Their hands shape stones that still stand. Their songs echo in myths that still inspire. Their choices set us on paths we continue today. May their stories bring you peace as you drift into slumber, knowing that you are part of a long and beautiful continuum. In the embrace of night, let the cities of old cradle you with their memories. May you rest within walls built from time and tenderness, hearing distant flutes and soft footsteps fading into the stars. 18. The Dawn of the Dragon, Liangzhu and Anyang. Our journey continues eastward, beyond Erlitou, into the lush basins and mist-shrouded hills of ancient China. Well before the Shang bronzes rang with ritual, and before written records on turtle shells and bones, communities along the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers built elaborate settlements that revealed different threads of urban creativity. On the coastal plain near Lake Tai, between 3400 and 2250 BCE, the Liangzhu culture flourished. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of earthen walls, waterworks, and ceremonial mounds that speak of careful planning. At Liangzhu, fields of rice extended across marshy plains, and canals channeled water to irrigate paddies. Houses built of timber and thatch stood on platforms above the damp ground, connected by raised walkways. In the heart of the city, an elevated platform supported large buildings, perhaps assembly halls or temples. Surrounding this core were walled precincts and carefully engineered flood control systems, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of hydrology. Liangzhu is best known for its exquisite jade. Craftsmen carved greenish-white nephrite into discs, tubes, and ceremonial axes. The most striking objects are the bai and kong, flat, circular discs and square tubes with round holes, often incised with stylized faces or spiral motifs. These jades were buried in elite tombs, placed in ceremonial caches, and sometimes broken intentionally during rituals. Their precise symbolism remains a mystery, but they clearly held deep spiritual significance. The labor required to quarry, carve, and polish jade reveals a society with specialized artisans and patrons who valued their work. In addition to jade, Liangzhu produced lacquers, ceramics, and silk. Its inhabitants cultivated rice in wet fields, a practice that required collective labor to manage water. The city's success was intimately tied to the cycle of rains and the rise and fall of rivers. When a major flood or climatic event occurred around 2200 BCE, the settlement was abandoned. Yet the memory of its artistry lived on in later Chinese cultures. Further north, along the banks of the Huan River, the city of Anyang rose during the late Shang period, around 1250–1050 BCE. Known to archaeologists as Yinshu, this site served as the Shang dynasty's capital. Anyang presents a different stage in urban development. Here, the palace precinct and royal cemetery reveal a highly stratified society. Massive rammed earth foundations supported halls and audience chambers. Royal tombs sank deep into the earth, lined with wooden planks and filled with bronze vessels, jade ornaments, chariots, and human sacrifices. Above ground, residential neighborhoods housed craftsmen who cast bronze vessels and bells, carved bone and ivory, and fashioned weapons. Workshops operated at an industrial scale, turning out ritual bronze ding cauldrons and ghee food containers, each decorated with coyote mask motifs and thunder patterns. Anyang is also where the earliest known Chinese writing emerges in abundance. Inscribed on ox scapulae and turtle plastrons, oracle bone inscriptions record questions posed to ancestors or deities. Will the harvest be good? Should the king go to war? Will the queen bear a son? Diviners drilled hollows in the bones and applied heat. The resulting cracks were read as answers, which were then inscribed along with the questions. These inscriptions reveal a literate bureaucracy concerned with agriculture, war, weather, health, and ritual. They mention the names of kings and queens, record sacrifices of cattle and humans, and describe military campaigns. The combination of palatial architecture, specialized production, and written administration marks Anyang as a mature urban society. Standing amid the ruins of its foundations, one can envision the clang of bronze, the murmur of diviners deciphering cracks, and the whisper of prayers rising from ancestral shrines. Liangzhu and Anyang illustrate how Chinese cities developed a distinct trajectory. Water management and rice cultivation in the south, bronze work and divination in the north. They reflect an intertwining of earthly needs and cosmic concerns, with jade and bronze serving as mediums between human and divine. They show that urbanism in East Asia was not a sudden import, but an indigenous evolution rooted in the land's rhythms. In the mist of early morning, as birds rise above paddies and the wind rustles bamboo groves, the echoes of these cities stir. Through jade and oracle bone, their builders speak to us of reverence for ancestors, mastery of craft, and the delicate balance between human ambition and the forces of nature. 19. Andean Heights, cities in the clouds beyond. Caral in the high valleys and soaring mountains of the Andes, urban life took on new forms. The Andean landscape is a place of extreme steep slopes, deep gorges, crisp air, and unpredictable weather. Yet human ingenuity crafted thriving cities here, each adapted to its altitude and environment. After Caral's decline around 1800 BCE, later cultures rose along trade routes that connected coast to highlands and jungle. One such center was Chavin de Huantar, situated at about 3,200 meters above sea level in the Peruvian highlands. Flourishing between 900 and 200 BCE, Chavin served as a religious pilgrimage site. Its builders carved a network of stone galleries and drainage canals into the mountain, decorated with jaguar and serpent motifs. Within dimly lit passages, priests guided initiates through the labyrinthine temple, accompanied by the roar of water rushing through hidden channels. At the heart of the temple stood the Lanzon, a granite monolith carved with the fanged visage of a deity, representing the convergence of earth and sky. Pilgrims traveled from across the region to offer tribute and seek oracular guidance. Shavin's influence radiated outward in the form of artistic styles and religious iconography, linking distant communities into a spiritual network. Centuries later, on the shores of Lake Titicaca, the city of Tiwanaku emerged. Between 400 and 1000 CE, Tiwanaku's engineers designed a ceremonial core with stepped platforms and colossal monoliths. They raised the Akapana, a terraced pyramid with a sunken court at its summit, and the Kalasasaya, a large rectangular platform ringed with stone pillars and carved heads. The Gateway of the Sun, cut from a single block of andesite, still stands, its lintel carved with an image of a staff-bearing figure surrounded by winged attendants. Tiwanaku relied on raised field agriculture called sukakolas. Farmers built long earth platforms separated by canals, which moderated microclimates and protected crops from frost. This technique enabled the cultivation of potatoes, quinoa, and other high-altitude crops to feed a growing population. The city's art, including decorated pottery and textile motifs, suggests a complex cosmology linking sun, moon, and earth. Further north, in what is now Bolivia, the city of Huari. Huari rose around 500 CE, creating a network of administrative centers linked by roads. Huari architecture featured multi-room compounds surrounding central patios, with orthogonal layouts reminiscent of later Inca towns. The Huari expanded their influence through diplomacy, military presence, and infrastructure, establishing colonies as far as the coast. Their example demonstrates that urbanism in the Andes was not isolated to a single era, but occurred in waves, each building upon the knowledge of predecessors. Perhaps the most famous Andean city is Machu Picchu. Built in the 15th century by the Inca, who inherited and synthesized traditions from Tiwanaku, Huari, and other ancestors. It clings to a ridge between forested peaks at 2,430 meters elevation. Stone terraces cascade down the slopes, while temples and dwellings cluster around plazas. The Intihuatana, a carved stone pillar, functions as a ritual marker aligned with the sun's movements. Though far removed in time from the first cities, Machu Picchu illustrates the continuity of Andean urbanism, integration of architecture with landscape, reverence for mountains and celestial cycles, and complex engineering adapted to altitude. These Andean cities, perched in the clouds, remind us that people can shape even the most challenging environments into sacred homes. As we imagine clouds drifting past carved stones and condors circling above, we hear the whispers of Caral's descendants resonating through time. 20. Mediterranean port cities, Byblos, Ugarit, and Troy. While rivers nourished inland cities, the sea connected coastal settlements in the eastern Mediterranean. Ports became gateways for exchange, where timber, metals, wine, and ideas flowed between cultures. Among the earliest maritime cities was Byblos, located on the coast of modern Lebanon. Inhabited since at least 5000 BCE, Byblos grew from a fishing village into a center of trade in cedar wood and papyrus. Egyptian pharaohs prized the cedar of Lebanon for shipbuilding and temple construction, and Byblos became a key supplier. In return, the city imported Egyptian goods and cultural influence. Temples built on terraced hills overlooked the harbor, while houses clustered along narrow streets. Over time, Byblos developed its own writing system, an alphabetic script that would influence Phoenician and ultimately Greek and Latin alphabets. The city's ability to mediate between civilizations across the sea illustrates how coastal urbanism differed from inland centers, fluid, multilingual, and outward-looking. Ugarit, situated along the Syrian coast, blossomed around 1800 BCE and reached its peak between 1450 and 1200 BCE. Like Byblos, Ugarit prospered through maritime trade, connecting Hittite, Cypriot, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian networks. Excavations have unearthed palaces, temples, warehouses, and residential areas built with stone and mud brick. Ugarit scribes wrote in multiple languages and scripts, including cuneiform and an early alphabet. A cache of clay tablets discovered in a palace archive preserves myths and epics, such as the story of the storm god Baal and his struggle against the sea. These texts reveal a literary culture and religious landscape that blended local and foreign elements. Ugarit's port thrummed with activity. Merchants unloaded jars of olive oil and wine, shipwrights repaired vessels, and diplomats negotiated treaties. When the Bronze Age collapsed around 1200 BCE, possibly due to invasions and disruptions of trade, Ugarit was destroyed and abandoned. Its ruins, buried under sand, preserved a snapshot of cosmopolitan life on the cusp of transition. Further north and west, on a hill overlooking the Dardanelles, a series of settlements collectively known as Troy grew and fell over millennia. The earliest layers of Troy date to the 3rd millennium BCE, when inhabitants built mud brick houses on stone foundations and fortified their town with walls. As centuries progressed, new walls were erected atop old ones, each larger and more complex. Troy's strategic position at the mouth of a strait, linking the Aegean and the Black Sea, made it a vital trading hub. Merchants exchanged copper, tin, textiles, and pottery. Around 1200 BCE, the city reached a peak of prosperity. Its fortifications boasted imposing towers and gates, and its residents lived in multi-room houses with hearths and storage rooms. Archaeologists have found evidence of a destructive fire that leveled one of the city's layers, though the cause, earthquake, war, or accident, remains debated. Legends from centuries later transformed Troy into the backdrop for the epic story of the Trojan War, as told in Homer's Iliad. Whether or not a war matching the epic occurred, the myth reveals how memory and imagination can elevate a city beyond its physical remains. The tale of Troy's fall resonates with themes seen in other stories: the fragility of cities, the interplay of human desire and divine intervention, and the enduring power of narrative. Byblos, Ugarit, and Troy each demonstrate how the Mediterranean's ebb and flow shaped urban life. They show that cities by the sea were open to currents of exchange, vulnerable to storms and fertile ground for blending languages, gods, and ideas. Sitting at a harbor's edge, listening to waves lap against a stone quay, one can almost hear the voices of sailors speaking in different tongues and the creak of ships preparing to depart for distant shores. 21. Rivers and rains. The role of climate water, so central to the rise of cities, also held the power to undermine them. The success of early urban centers depended on predictable cycles of rain and flood. When those cycles shifted, the consequences could be profound. Jericho thrived as long as the springs flowed. When groundwater levels fell during arid phases, the settlement diminished. In the Jordan Valley and Levant, oscillations between wetter and drier periods influenced the size and stability of communities. Çatalhöyük's prosperity was tied to the wetlands and steppe around the Çarşamba River. Changes in climate could shrink the wetlands, reducing reeds and wildlife. The Indus civilization, so reliant on monsoon rains and river dynamics, faced challenges when tectonic activity redirected rivers and when monsoon patterns changed. Some researchers argue that a weakening of the monsoon after 2000 BCE reduced water availability, contributing to the decline of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. As rivers dried or changed course, wells and canals silted up, making agriculture more difficult. Similarly, Eridu and other Sumerian cities experienced shifts in river channels and salinization of soils due to over-irrigation. When the Euphrates moved westward, it left some cities stranded and cut off from water. Salty soils reduced crop yields, prompting migrations to more favorable areas. In Egypt, the Nile's floods were generally reliable, but occasional low floods brought famine. Pharaohs were judged on their ability to secure the inundation. Failure could lead to political upheaval. In the Andean highlands, climatic events such as droughts and El Niño episodes affected agricultural terraces and irrigation. Caral may have declined due to prolonged drought combined with social factors. Further south, the collapse of Tiwanaku around 1000 CE is linked to a multi-century drought that lowered lake levels and disrupted raised field agriculture. Climate change also influenced Mediterranean port cities. At Ugarit, a combination of drought and disruption of trade networks contributed to its fall. In Troy and the Aegean, earthquakes and changes in sea level may have damaged harbors and fortifications. For Chinese cities, floods along the Yellow River could be catastrophic. Ancient chronicles record entire courses shifting overnight. In response, rulers built levees and canals to channel water, demonstrating the constant tension between human settlement and natural forces. The story of Liangju's abandonment following a major flood underscores how a single climatic event can end centuries of habitation. Early cities devised strategies to adapt. They built walls against floods, terraces to catch soil, and reservoirs to store rain. They worshipped water deities and performed rituals to coax rainfall. When adaptation failed, people moved. The collapse of a city did not necessarily signal the end of a civilization. Rather, it marked a reconfiguration. Survivors carried knowledge and traditions to new locations where they built again. Understanding the role of climate reminds us that urbanism is a dialogue with the environment. The resilience of the first cities depended on flexible social structures, ecological awareness, and spiritual frameworks that made sense of unpredictable nature. In our own time, as climate change reshapes landscapes, the experiences of these early societies offer cautionary tales and seeds of wisdom. We too must learn to live with rivers and rains, to respect their cycles, and to adapt with humility. 22. The birth of writing and record keeping. One of the transformative elements of city life is the emergence of writing. As communities grew and economies became more complex, the need to record transactions, communicate across distance, and memorialize events gave rise to scripts. In Sumer, around 3200 BCE, scribes devised cuneiform, a series of wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets with a stylus. Early tablets recorded grain allotments, lists of workers, and offerings to temples. Over time, the script evolved to capture myths, hymns, and laws. The Epic of Gilgamesh, administrative records from Uruk, and the Code of Ur-Nammu are all preserved in cuneiform. The training of a scribe was long and rigorous. They worked in tablet houses, learning hundreds of signs and practicing calligraphy. Their work allowed for the management of surpluses and the codification of cultural memory. In Egypt, writing took the form of hieroglyphs, pictures that represented sounds, words, or concepts. Hieroglyphs appeared on temple walls, tombs, and papyrus scrolls. They recorded the deeds of pharaohs, hymns to gods, and spells to guide the dead through the afterlife. Hieratic, a cursive script, and later Demotic, made writing more suited to administrative tasks. Scribes in Memphis and Thebes kept track of taxes, trade goods, and census lists. Their pen strokes on papyrus preserved history for millennia. The interplay between text and image in Egyptian art reveals a culture in which writing was part of a sacred world, not merely a practical tool. The Indus script, found on seals and tablets, remains undeciphered. The symbols are often short sequences, suggesting that they recorded names, titles, or commodities. The brevity may indicate that writing served as a marking system for goods rather than as a medium for literature. Yet the uniformity of symbols across hundreds of sites implies an agreed set of signs, a script. Its mystery invites speculation about what stories might lie behind those tiny marks. In China, the oracle bone inscriptions at Anyang provide early examples of the Chinese writing system. These texts evolved into bronze inscriptions and later into the standard script. Writing allowed the Shang kings to communicate with ancestors, confirm decisions, and maintain social order. In Minoan Crete, Linear A recorded inventories and offerings. Its descendant Linear B, used by Mycenaean Greeks, records lists of goods, livestock, and personnel. Each script served the needs of its society, reflecting administrative structures, religious beliefs, and linguistic contexts. Beyond symbolic writing, other record-keeping systems developed. In the Andes, the Quipu of Caral and later Inca used knotted cords to encode information. Different colors, lengths, and positions of knots represented numbers and possibly categories. Quipucamayaks, specialists in reading and tying quipus, carried information across empire roads. This textile-based system highlights the diversity of human ingenuity in recording data. It may have been especially suited to cultures with rich weaving traditions and oral memory. Similarly, sequences of motifs on Minoan seals and Indus amulets may have communicated identity and ownership without being fully linguistic. The act of sealing a jar or document was itself a ritual, a moment of authentication and protection. Writing transformed cities. It enabled the regulation of labor, allocation of resources, and dissemination of commands. It allowed rulers to claim legitimacy by inscribing their deeds in stone. It preserved myths and laws connecting generations. Yet, writing did not replace oral tradition. Rather, the two coexisted, with written records reinforcing and sometimes challenging spoken narratives. In reflecting on the birth of writing, we recognize how communication technology shapes social structures. The stylus, chisel, and knot changed how humans interacted, organized, and imagined. Our modern scripts, digital and otherwise, trace their ancestry to these ancient signs pressed into clay, carved into stone, painted on papyrus, or tied into fiber. Through writing, the voices of the first city dwellers whisper across time, waiting for attentive ears. 23. Cities in transition, decline, and legacy. No city lasts forever. Even the most magnificent walls crumble, and the most carefully tended canals silt up. What happens when a city declines? Often, the decline was gradual, marked by shrinking populations, changing trade routes, or environmental stress. In some cases, like Ugarit, destruction was sudden, leaving charred layers and abandoned homes. In others, such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, inhabitants left slowly, perhaps moving to smaller villages or migrating to more fertile lands. At Eridu, the water moved away, leaving the once bustling port stranded in a desert. At Liangzhu, a catastrophic flood may have submerged fields and houses, compelling survivors to seek new lands. In the Andes, droughts and political shifts led to the abandonment of Tiwanaku and Wari. Each city's ending is as instructive as its beginning, highlighting vulnerabilities and the importance of adaptation. Yet, decline does not erase influence. The knowledge of irrigation, architecture, and craft traveled with migrants. The people who left the Indus cities carried memories of brick-making and drainage into new settlements along the Ganges. Former residents of Caral may have transmitted knowledge of pyramids and quipus to later Andean societies. The collapse of the Bronze Age Mediterranean created opportunities for new cultures, like the Phoenicians and Greeks, who inherited maritime routes and writing systems. The memory of Troy inspired epic poetry that shaped Greek identity. In China, the fall of the Shang at Anyang gave way to the Zhou, who modified political and ritual practices but preserved the writing system. In Egypt, Memphis ceded political dominance to Thebes and later cities, yet its cult of Ptah persisted. Cities also leave legacies in the land itself. Mounds rising above plains mark former walls and houses. Abandoned canals and terraces alter water flow and soil composition. Buried seeds of domesticated crops contribute to biodiversity. animal species like domesticated cattle and sheep spread along with human migrations. Cultural practices, such as the building of shrines or the celebration of festivals, persist even as urban centers fade. Memory resides in songs and stories, in the orientation of houses, and in the way fields are divided. The persistence of agricultural terraces in the Andes long after cities declined exemplifies how infrastructure can continue to shape the landscape for centuries. As we consider decline, we are reminded of the impermanence of human endeavors. The first cities teach us humility. They show that prosperity is contingent on environmental balance, social cohesion, and adaptability. They caution against overexploitation of resources and the dangers of ignoring climate variability. At the same time, they demonstrate resilience. Cities rose again and again in similar places because of enduring advantages: fertile soils, strategic locations, abundant water. Successive societies rebuilt on ancient mounds, consciously connecting with their predecessors. The layered nature of tells with new cities rising upon old embodies continuity amid change. In acknowledging both the decline and the legacy of early cities, we deepen our appreciation for the cyclical rhythm of history. 24. The web of exchange, trade, ideas, and movement. Trade was not merely an economic activity, but a lifeline that connected distant cities and peoples. Through exchange, communities acquired resources that were scarce locally and built relationships that fostered peace and cooperation. Jericho traded obsidian and seashells. Çatalhöyük sent obsidian blades and received copper and shells in return. Mergar exchanged lapis lazuli and turquoise for seashells and metals. In the Indus Valley, traders crossed deserts and mountains with caravans of goods, using standardized weights to measure grain and metals. Seals with animal motifs and scripts served as passports and signatures, ensuring recognition and trust across vast distances. Boats sailed from Lothal down the Gulf of Cambay, carrying cotton textiles and beads to Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. Sumerian cities like Ur and Uruk imported timber from Lebanon, copper from Oman, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. In return, they exported woolen textiles and grains. Egyptian expeditions sailed to the land of Punt, probably along the Red Sea coast, to procure incense, ebony, ivory, and exotic animals. The Minoans of Knossos sent pottery, saffron, and olive oil to the Levant and Egypt, returning with gold and ivory. Phoenician descendants of Byblos and Tyre established colonies around the Mediterranean, spreading their alphabet and seafaring skills. Caral exchanged cotton and dried fish with highland communities who supplied maize, beans, and camelid wool. In China, jade from Khotan and silk from the Yangtze region traveled along the early Silk Roads, linking east and west in embryonic form. Trade also facilitated the movement of ideas. Technologies like metallurgy, pottery styles, and agricultural techniques spread through contact. Religious concepts and artistic motifs traveled with merchants and pilgrims. The bull imagery of Minoan Crete may have influenced Mycenaean culture. Indus carnelian beads have been found in Mesopotamia. Sumerian cylinder seals inspired similar objects in Iran and the Levant. Even writing systems spread. The alphabet of Ugarit influenced Phoenician, which informed Greek, Latin, and eventually the scripts used today. Migration was another vector for exchange. Droughts, wars, and opportunities spurred people to move, carrying customs and knowledge. The Indo-European migrations across Eurasia, the Bantu expansions in Africa, and the Austronesian voyages across the Pacific all reshaped urban landscapes and cultural patterns. The networks of exchange created a sense of interdependence. City dwellers were aware of distant lands and the wider world. Their myth sometimes reflected these connections. Tales of faraway mountains where gods dwelt, seas inhabited by monsters, and heroes who traveled to unknown realms. Interdependence also meant vulnerability. disruptions in trade could cause shortages, famines, or conflict. The collapse of Bronze Age trade networks around 1200 BCE precipitated widespread upheaval in the Mediterranean. But over the long term, the web of exchange fostered diversity, innovation, and resilience. It linked the first cities into a global tapestry that prefigured today's interconnected world. 25. Reflections on Urban Time. Our exploration has taken us across continents and centuries, revealing the myriad ways humans transformed landscapes into cities. Urban time is not linear, it is layered and cyclical. Cities rise, flourish, decline, and rise again. They are born of necessity and imagination, rooted in water and soil, sustained by cooperation, enlivened by belief, and connected by exchange. They embody our collective capacity to adapt and innovate. The first cities were experiments in living together at scale. Their successes and failures, hopes and fears, joys and sorrows echo in our own urban experiences. As you close your eyes, imagine the layers of urban time stacked beneath your feet. Beneath the pavement of modern streets lie cobblestones and earth. Beneath the houses are foundations of earlier homes. Beneath those, the traces of hearths and post holes from villages long forgotten. Imagine voices layered like sediment, the laughter of children in Çatalhöyük, the chants of priests in Uruk, the songs of sailors in Byblos, the whispered prayers of mothers in Liangju. These voices remind us that we are never truly alone. In our cities, we walk among the dreams of many. By honoring their legacy, we can build with greater care, crafting spaces that nurture community, respect the earth, and celebrate the diversity of human creativity. May these reflections accompany you into sleep, weaving your dreams with those of ancient builders and guiding your heart toward a deeper connection with the world. 26. African Urban Beginnings. Kerma, Meroe, and Jena, Geno. Across the deserts and savannas of Africa, cities rose and flourished in dialogue with rivers, trade winds, and the rhythms of pastoral life. In the Nubian lands along the Middle Nile, the kingdom of Kush emerged as a powerful neighbor to Egypt. Its earliest capital, Kerma, flourished around 2500 BCE in what is now Sudan. Here, a community of pastoralists, farmers, and traders built elaborate earthen walls and quarters for worship, storage, and industry. At the heart of Kerma stood a towering mud brick temple known today as the Western Defufa. Rising nearly 20 meters above the plain, its stepped mass of sun-baked bricks was coated in plaster and painted in subtle hues. Ladders and ramps led to rooftop shrines, where priests offered libations to ancestral deities and the god of the watery underworld. Nearby, houses of mud brick and reeds spread across the floodplain, clustered in neighborhoods linked by alleyways. Grain silos and granaries stored sorghum and millet harvested from fields nourished by the Nile's seasonal flood, while workshops hummed with the sound of potters shaping clay and metalworkers casting bronze and copper ornaments. Kerma's cemetery lay beyond the settlement, a field of circular tumuli covered with gravel and decorated with cattle skulls. Some royal tombs were immense, containing chambers lined with fired brick, where rulers were interred, alongside sacrificed servants, pottery, ivory carvings, and jewelry. The scent of incense and the hum of funerary chants would have carried on the desert wind as communities honored the dead and reaffirmed the unity of their living city. As centuries passed, the center of Kush shifted downstream to a new capital, Meroe. Situated between the Nile and the Atbara rivers, Meroe flourished from the 8th century BCE to the 4th century CE. The city was part of a network of settlements that included the religious centers of Naka and Musawarat es-Sufra. Its landscape blended desert hills with riverine groves. Pyramids of slender proportions lined the royal cemeteries, their stone faces angled toward the sky. Each pyramid crowned a burial chamber that contained offerings of gold, iron tools, and imported goods. Within the urban core, Palaces, temples, and workshops stood side by side. Architects drew inspiration from Egyptian and Greco-Roman styles, adorning temples with lotus capitals and sculpted lions while incorporating Kushite motifs such as sun discs and crowned serpents. Iron furnaces roared just outside the city's walls, their bellows fed by acacia charcoal, making Meroe a center of iron production. Markets were shaded by woven mats. Merchants traded ivory, incense, hides, and ostrich feathers for Mediterranean wine, glassware, and textiles. Water reservoirs excavated basins lined with stone captured seasonal rains and allowed gardens to flourish even in dry years. At night, when the heat of the day subsided, drummers and singers gathered beneath acacia trees to recount tales of warrior queens and distant campaigns. Meroe's longevity owed much to its ability to synthesize influences from north and south, to harness desert and river, and to channel the wealth of transcontinental trade along the Nile corridor. Far to the west, another urban tradition took shape along the Niger River. Geno, also called Old Gene, arose on the floodplain of the inland Niger Delta around the 3rd century BCE. Unlike the stone-built cities of the Nile Valley, Geno was a city of earthen architecture. Its houses were made of mud mixed with straw and rice husks, molded into bricks and stacked to form round or rectilinear walls. Villagers plastered the surfaces smooth and added decorative grooves and motifs. Because the Niger overflowed its banks each year, families built their homes on low mounds known as togher, raising them above floodwaters. Streets followed the contours of these mounds, winding among courtyards and workshops. The city's economy relied on fertile fields, fishing in rivers and ponds, and its position at the junction of trade routes between the Sahara and the forest zones of West Africa. Markets buzzed with exchange, dried fish, rice, millet, and vegetables from the delta, salt, copper, and horses from the north, cola nuts, gold, and forest products from the south. Craftspeople produced pottery with incised patterns, terracotta figurines, and iron tools. Specialized neighborhoods contained smiths and potters, hinting at a degree of central organization. Archaeologists have found evidence of a mud brick wall built around 800 CE that encircled the community, perhaps marking a civic boundary rather than serving a purely defensive purpose. Intriguingly, excavations have uncovered no palaces or monumental temples. Power may have been distributed among clan leaders and guilds rather than concentrated in royal courts. Burials occurred in large ceramic urns sunk into the earth between houses, suggesting that ancestors remained close to the living. Terracotta statues depict horsemen, warriors, women kneeling in prayer, and figures afflicted by disease, testifying to a complex spiritual life and artistic sensibility. By the 9th century, Geno began to decline, possibly due to changing river dynamics, population pressures, and the rise of Islam. Its inhabitants established a new town slightly upriver that would become the medieval city of Gene, famed for its great mosque built of mud and wood. The legacy of Geno, however, endures in the earthen architecture, trade networks, and artistic traditions of West Africa. Imagining its bustling markets and quiet riverbanks, one can almost feel the warmth of the Sahel sun and hear the rhythmic calls of merchants selling rice and salt. Kerma, Meroe, and Geno show that urbanism in Africa was as diverse and innovative as that of the Old World's more widely known centers. They demonstrate that cities can thrive in deserts and floodplains, built of mud and brick, shaped by trade and ritual. These places remind us that the story of the first cities is global, extending beyond familiar narratives into the heart of Africa. Listening to the whispers of cattle bells near Kerma, the clang of iron in Meroe, and the gentle splash of pirogues on the Niger, we hear echoes of a continent's early urban heartbeat. 27. The rhythm of daily life. While monuments and myths catch our attention, it is the ordinary rhythms of daily life that truly animate a city. Imagine waking in a mud brick house at dawn, the air cool after a desert night. A faint light filters through a reed mat covering a small window. In Jericho, a woman rises from a reed mat, laid on a raised platform, listens to the soft coo of doves perched in the rafters, and begins to knead dough from barley flour and water. She tends the hearth, coaxing embers back to life, and sets a clay pot to boil water for stew. A child stirs, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and peeks out onto the roof where neighbors are already moving. On the flat rooftops of Çatalhöyük, ladders connect one house to the next, and early risers carry baskets of reeds and clay to repair walls or fetch water from a nearby well. The scent of baking bread mingles with that of wet earth as dew evaporates in the morning sun. At dawn's first light in Mohenjo-Daro, men lead bullock carts along brick streets, their wheels creaking softly. Women sweep courtyards with reed brooms, pushing debris toward covered drains that carry wastewater away. Children chase each other around wells, laughing until a mother's voice calls them back to help grind grain or collect firewood. As the sun climbs higher, the city hums with industry. In Uruk, scribes sit cross-legged in a courtyard, pressing reed styluses into clay tablets and murmuring numbers as they record grain rations for temple workers. The temple kitchen emits aromas of roasted lamb, onions, and garlic. In Memphis, sculptors chip away at limestone blocks destined for a pharaoh's tomb, while barge crews unload cedar logs floated down from Lebanon. Fishermen in Liangzhu cast nets into canals, pulling in shimmering fish that will feed families and be offered at ancestral shrines. At Caral, weavers seated in the shade twist cotton threads into ropes and fabrics. Their fingers move rhythmically, guided by patterns passed down through generations. At the Indus ports, bead makers drill holes in carnelian stones using bow drills, producing tiny treasures for export. In Miro, iron smelters feed charcoal into furnaces and watch sparks dance as ore is transformed into glowing metal. Each craft has its own tempo, its own set of gestures and sounds. Together, they create a symphony of work that echoes from dawn until dusk. Market time brings variety and noise. Vendors spread goods under awnings, baskets of dates, figs and gourds, bolts of linen and wool, rings of bronze and silver, jars of oil, bundles of reeds. Traders call out prices in different languages, for cities are multilingual places. A shepherd from the hills sells cheese and milk. A potter offers decorated jars. A scribe sits with blank tablets ready to write contracts. The smell of spices, cumin, coriander, incense drifts through the air. In the shady corners of Byblos and Ugarit, sailors gossip about storms at sea and news from Cyprus. In Knossos, boys practice bull leaping in a courtyard, laughter punctuating their daring flips. The market is more than a place of exchange. It is a social stage where news is shared, alliances formed, and differences negotiated. Underneath the bustle lies an invisible web of relationships that binds the community together. As evening falls, the pace slows. Families gather around meals of stewed lentils, barley bread, roasted goat, or boiled rice, depending on the region. Grandparents tell stories of ancestors and gods. In Eridu, tales center on Enki, the god of fresh water, and his trickster wisdom. In Liangzhu, elders recount how dragons carved channels to control floods. In Minoan Crete, musicians play lyres and pipes as dancers move in circles, their skirts swirling like waves. In Miro, storytellers recite epics of warrior queens who fought off invaders and built dams to trap the Nile. Children fall asleep listening to myths that stitch together past and present. Outside, the stars wheel overhead. Night is a time of stillness and reflection, but also of vigilance. Watchmen patrol walls, fishermen cast nets under moonlight, priests burn offerings to ensure the favor of gods. The social fabric of early cities was woven from many threads. Roles were shaped, by gender, age, class, and specialized skills. Women often managed households, prepared food, brewed beer, spun thread, and tended gardens. In many cultures, they also participated in trade, weaving, and ritual. Men farmed, herded animals, constructed houses, and served as soldiers or administrators. Children learned by watching and imitating. Elders provided wisdom and mediated disputes. Priests and priestesses performed ceremonies, interpreted omens, and kept calendars. Artisans, potters, metalworkers, weavers, carpenters held specialized knowledge that was both practical and sacred as their crafts connected earthly materials to divine patterns. Social hierarchies existed, but they were not uniform. Some cities, like Mohenjo-Daro, show few signs of elite palaces, suggesting more egalitarian organization, while others, like Memphis and Uruk, were stratified, with kings and priests at the top. The diversity of social structures underscores the creative flexibility of humans in forming communities. Daily life was not static. Festivals punctuated the year, marking harvests, solstices, and divine birthdays. In Egypt, citizens celebrated the Opet festival, parading statues of gods from Karnak to Luxor. In Sumer, the Akitu festival renewed the king's mandate and dramatized the cosmic battle between order and chaos. In Indus cities, communal baths like the Great Bath may have hosted ritual ablutions. In Liangzhu, jade rituals aligned with celestial events, inviting harmony between heaven and earth. These celebrations reinforced social bonds and offered moments of catharsis and joy amid the demands of work. They also reminded communities that their labors were part of a larger cosmic order. To dwell on the inner life of early cities is to appreciate the universality of human experience. Across continents, people woke with the sun, labored to feed their families, told stories, and cared for their dead. They worried about floods and droughts, negotiated with neighbors, celebrated love and birth, mourned loss, and sought meaning in the cycles of nature. They created art and music, developed technologies, and built spaces that reflected their values. The details differed: mud or stone, grain or rice, scribes or quipu makers, but the underlying patterns resonate. In listening to the heartbeat of daily life, we connect with the countless individuals who lived in these early cities. Their hands shaped our world. Their dreams laid the foundations for our own urban existence. As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself walking through their streets, feeling the texture of sun-baked walls, hearing the murmur of neighbors, and sensing the enduring warmth of human community. Good night.